So just to give you a little bit of outline of what we will be talking about today. So I'll do a really quick introduction to the center, and then we hear from B. Natzler, who is the People and Business Team Leader at CCC. So we're really delighted that B is doing a keynote talk at this event. We hear from Sara Walker, who is talking about our new publication, which is going to be out later today. And we are also then going to hear from our team leads who lead the various different research themes as part of the Energy Demand Research Center. And at the end, we'll have some time for question and answers. So welcome everyone, and we look forward to telling you more about the EDRC. So just to start, we are the UKRI's main investment in energy demand. We are funded by 5 years and started officially on the 1st of July. And we have about 45 people across 12 different universities in the UK. You can see a photo there. We had our centre kickoff meeting in Leeds earlier in September. And we also have co-created a lot of our projects with various different external partners. So it's really great in terms of, thinking about collaboration from day one, and how we can make sure that we have a center that has lots of impact. Can I just ask if anyone is not muted, that you could mute yourself, please, so that we don't get background noise from others, because we are recording the session. Thank you. So some of the key motivating points for us are that, there is a transition happening to net zero, and we need it in order to tackle and address climate change. But equally, we know that this process is going to be quite complex, because it involves lots of technical, political, social and cultural issues. But at the same time, we think that this is a great opportunity for energy demand reduction in the UK. And John Barrett, who leads our Futures theme, is leading on research which previously showed that we could reduce demand by up to 50% by 2050. So our centre takes an interdisciplinary and cross-sectoral approach. And so we look at energy demand across buildings, transport and industry. And we believe that we need to do a lot of networking and build lots of partnerships. So that's very key for our centre. And we also build on multiple previous centres' legacy, namely the Centre for Research into Energy Demand Solutions, CREDS, which was the previous centre that did some really excellent work in this area. And we are very much looking forward to building on a lot of that. And obviously, we also have our own vision, which is to inform and inspire energy demand reductions that support an affordable, comfortable and secure net zero society. And we do this by delivering impactful research on energy demand that produces actionable solutions for industry, policymakers, practitioners and charities. And our main research themes, which you will hear about later on, are futures, flexibility, place, governance and equity. And I'm not going to go into great detail of those now, because they will be presented later on. So, and in addition to the research themes, we also have several centre cross-cutting challenges on issues like jobs and skills, energy security, engineering solutions and delivery models. And very much part of our centre is, making sure that we engage with the various different audiences. So we have a kind of very value-based approach. So our main values are being fair to people and the planet, being transparent in our approach, being bold in our thoughts and actions, and being open to different points of view, as well, and lastly, being impactful towards the future of energy demand. So this is very much feeding into our engagement and how we, engage with various different stakeholders in terms of thinking about how we shape our outcomes, so how we test our assumptions, identify potential risks, and take on any opportunities that are coming our way. So what we in effect will be doing is we aim to deliver a world-leading interdisciplinary research program. We very much build on previous research, like I mentioned before. We deliver a rigorous and goal-created and actionable research program. And a lot of our outputs are aimed to be evidence-based and very engaging. And we embed EDI from the start. So equality, diversity, and inclusion is very key for us in terms of how we do research and what type of research we do. And this all will lead into helping to create an innovative, flexible, and integrated net zero energy system. And I'll now pass over to Bea, who is from the Climate Change Committee. And like I mentioned before, Bea leads the people and business team. And we are really delighted to hear from her on next. So Bea, over to you. And I can do the slide changes when you let me know when to change the slide.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I was at an online event the other day where someone said ping every time a slide was meant to go. So I'm not going to do that. But thank you so much for having me. I'm really delighted at the launch of the Energy Demand Research Centre, and the CCC is really excited to be on the advisory board of this, and really looking forward to using and drawing on the various evidence and outputs that comes out from this. So yeah, really happy to be here. So yeah, if you don't mind going on to the next slide, I'm just going to give a brief presentation really on initially the work of the CCC and why energy demand is of so much interest to us, and then just pull out a couple of areas where I think in particular, they demonstrate how the topics that EDRC will cover will be really useful and relevant to some of the questions that we wrestle with. So first of all, who is the Climate Change Committee? So we are the UK government's independent advisor on climate change. So we advise the UK and devolved governments on emissions targets and also on adaptations and making sure the UK can be resilient to the effects of climate change. What this means in practice is that every 5 years, we produce advice to the UK government on the level of carbon budget, a sort of 5-year period covering emissions that they should set. And every year we publish a report that goes to Parliament that assesses progress on policy to reduce emissions in the UK. So traditionally, most teams within the CCC focus on a particular sector of the economy that emits. So for example, we've got teams covering transport, industry, buildings, etc. The team I head up is a little bit different in what I personally think is a really cool way, in that we cover the cross-cutting issues relating to society for the transition. So in the Climate Change Act, which is what sets up the CCC effectively, we're required to think about social impacts, including fuel poverty of the transition to net zero, and also economic circumstances, fiscal impacts, and competitiveness. So within that, that means that there's people in my team thinking about green choices, how households can be supported to make the changes that they need at a household level, as well as the role of business, finance, just transition, etc. Okay, on to the next slide, please. Great. So this just shows how our advice relating to carbon budgets can turn into reality with the government taking on policy. So you can see here, essentially the black line is historical emissions, and the purple dashed line is what, based on CCC modelling, we think is a feasible and cost-effective pathway for the UK to get to net zero emissions by 2050. So you can see in green there are previous carbon budgets, so carbon budgets 1 and 2, which were levels of emission reduction set by the UK government as targets into law, and then other carbon budgets that we've advised on and the UK government has set as well. So we're currently in the process of developing our advice for carbon budget 7, which you can see will likely be quite a small blue chunk in the final bit of the sort of late 2030s and early 2040s. And yeah, if you don't mind going on to the next slide. So to inform this advice that we give to government, we gather a huge range of evidence, and my colleagues do in-depth modelling to model what emission reductions are possible across the economy, taking into account a lot of different factors, including technological developments, costing, wider impacts on society, and many others. And so what you can see here, the purple line shows that same balanced pathway for emissions to reach net zero by 2050 that I showed on the slide before. And then the black line that's a bit higher is the baseline emissions. So what we assume emissions would look like if we just kept going as we currently are. And you can see between that are the various actions that we can take to help reduce emissions and bring them down to that balanced pathway. And if you look at the top two, you can see the reduced demand for carbon intensive activities. So that can be things like changing how we eat and travel, and greater efficiency in use of energy and resources. So you can see that's a fairly significant chunk of abatement in our pathways from now through to 2050 that directly relies on demand reduction and energy efficiency. And then secondly, on that kind of point 2 section, the orange piece, electrification, there's real significant emission reductions that can be caused by us switching from higher carbon technologies, such as like how we travel and heat our homes, to lower carbon ones that rely on electricity as well. So yeah, hopefully that just demonstrates at a high level how from our analysis, thinking about energy demand and energy demand management is really key to getting to net zero. So next slide, please. Great, so these are just a couple of quick graphs to show how that can look in aspects. So a lot of focus, understandably, has been in the past on electricity supply and how we can decarbonise our electricity supply. But increasingly, we're recognising that alongside that, if you go to the next slides, we also need to think about the demand side. So there'll be increasing electricity demand, and we'll be needing to switch from internal combustion engine cars to electric vehicles, to low carbon heating, and also thinking about electrifying aspects of manufacturing and construction, and etc. Next slide, please. And the end result of that is that we see dramatic reductions, unsurprisingly, in oil and natural gas demand. So yeah, next slide, please. So I mentioned that we're increasingly thinking about that demand side aspect and the role of society, and kind of to date, a lot of emissions reduction has been achieved through decarbonising the grid, which is fantastic. But in the next 10, 20 years, we're going to need to see changes that will actually interact a lot more with various actors in society and affect how we all are moving about and living our lives. And so for our 6th carbon budget advice in 2020, an expert group published this for us, which identified that the net zero transition will take place within a socio-technical system. So we can't just think about technologies, we also really need to consider the interacting roles of different actors. Hence why the EDRC's focus on place, governance, equity, all these really knotty, complex, important issues is really welcome, and we're really excited to see that. So on to the next slide. Great, so I just thought I'd pull out, thinking about the 5 themes of futures, flexibility, governance, place, and equity, a couple of areas that the CCC is actively doing analysis on, thinking about, that feel like they have useful links into some of the future work of the EDRC. So I won't talk through these in detail, but just noting energy demand flexibility we see as an important area to deepen our understanding of what is possible and how that could be achieved. Thinking about the green choices and purchases that households and businesses will need to make, and how those can be supported and made attractive, affordable, and easy. The key role of local government, governance and planning, both as a potential blocker, but also as really key delivery agents and at the forefront of the transition. The distribution of costs and cost savings for households and different household types, so recognising we'll need carefully thought out policy that thinks about how households in different income brackets and locations will be impacted and what different support will be needed. The co-benefits of the transition, so thinking about how reducing emissions can impact on health and biodiversity and other things that we care about that we can't necessarily easily monetize. Spatial considerations, so recognising while this can be challenging, that the more that we can be spatially granular in both modelling what actions need to be taken and what impacts these might have, the more of a holistic and meaningful picture we will have to inform policymakers and others. Workers and skills, which I'll get into in a second, so I won't go into in more detail. Fuel poverty, so thinking about where there's win-wins, for where net zero policy can also help support government targets for reducing fuel poverty, and then impacts on different social groups, both those with protected characteristics under the public sector equality duty, and also more broadly to really make sure we're being socially responsible and thinking about how different people are going to be impacted and interact. Okay, great. So I'm just going to really quickly talk through those 2 ones in bold to give you a bit more of a sense of how we wrestle with some of these things, and hopefully that will pinpoint as well how I think having a whole research centre thinking about these issues is really going to help us develop some useful tools and frameworks, and we'll be interested to see what comes out from it. So next slide, please. So starting out on household green choices, I imagine many on in this launch event are aware, but some of the key green choices that we think about in our analysis that we're keen to understand what is feasible and what's an effective way of promoting them are one-off purchases by households, repeated choices, and those together, although we're updating our analysis, roughly form about 50%, this is rough, of abatement by 2050 in our 6th carbon budget, so pretty significant. So one-off purchases, the big hitters are switching to electric vehicles, to heat pumps or other low carbon heating and insulation in homes. Repeated choices in the 6th carbon budget, we consider changes to diet, flying, shifting to public transport or active travel. And then increasingly, my team are really trying to tease out the complexity of stakeholders in this space when we think about what can be achieved. So recognizing, for example, if you're thinking about a household purchasing a heat pump, how it's very different if there's a landlord involved, if it's social housing, etc. And thinking about the role that the market and businesses can play in providing opportunities or low-cost offerings. And then finally, I just wanted to note on this, we recommended to government this year in our progress report that people should be empowered to make green choices through clearer information and government leadership by policies which make green choices easy, attractive and affordable. And I think we really recognise that it's really key for households to be supported in this and it not to be simply a matter of rising costs or kind of anything draconian. So really interested in continuing to work with others to identify ways to make this really feasible and inclusive. Great. And then final bit was just the next slide, please. Just on workers and skills. So another one of the, not the main themes of the research centre, but as you understand it, sort of cross-cutting priority for the research centre. So the role of workers and skills in the transition is really key. We did a report earlier this year looking at the net zero workforce. And I just wanted to pull out a few things. So one is that the impact across the workforce will really vary by characteristics. So you can see in that graph on the right that essentially the bar charts in bold are sectors that are going to be most impacted or relevant to the net zero transition. And then the dotted vertical line shows the UK average proportion of the workforce identifying as an ethnic minority. And you can see across those different sectors, there's a real range of representation there, which has implications for policy. And it's not the CCC's role to advise specifically what those are, but we're really keen to make sure we're highlighting where this is relevant so government can take that into account. So really looking forward to the equity theme of this and interested to see what things come out from that. And then, yeah, going on to the final slide, please. Yeah, just to note, we sought out to develop a framework in our analysis on workers and skills to bring out the different aspects for each sector that is involved in the net zero transition that mean that there might be a particular case for policy intervention. So we recognise that for some sectors, actually, with the right broad policy in place, additional levers might not be needed to make sure that skilled workers are in the right place at the right time, and also particular workforces aren't really adversely impacted. However, when the transition for a sector is going to be really rapid, really geographically concentrated, and will involve rapid growth or rapid phase down, that could be a situation where the government would consider if further policy interventions needed to make sure the skilled workforce is there in time for growth and to make sure people are protected from disruptive impacts where it's phased down. So you can see it's slightly complicated, apologies, but we developed this kind of axes that maps out the different sectors. So the green ones are the ones we expect to grow, the red ones to phase down, and the orange ones to sort of transition, so go through quite a dramatic shift. So perhaps just to pull out an example, you can see for EV battery manufacturing there, that's expected to grow. It's quite large, so the growth would be quite large. That's the size of the bubble, and it would probably be rapid and concentrated, so might require some reskilling and active management. One thing that we found with these topics is they're quite different to what a lot of my colleagues think about a model when they think about technologies and costings and things that suit themselves a bit better to pure quantitative analysis. And so we're always keen to engage with others to learn about different ways to think about things, different kinds of evidence to draw on. And I think EDRC will be a really key centre to engage with in that process. So yeah, I'm going to close there, but just to reiterate, really pleased to see the launch of this centre. And thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Bea. That was brilliant, and also thank you so much for agreeing to be on our advisory board. You mentioned it there yourself, so in that case we can see it publicly now too. So very delighted to have you on board, and thank you for the presentation. So, and next I will move over to Sara Walker, who is co-directing EDRC. So over to you, Sara.
Thanks, Mari. So today we are launching our call to action, and this document we have a short version and a slightly longer version which describes how we think under every set of options that energy demand reduction can make the energy transition more affordable, more equitable, and easier to deliver. So we're interested in identifying through this call to action document the areas that we can really impact on as we investigate demand reduction through our 5 themes. Next slide, please. So B touched on the need for various actors to be thinking of in a socio-technical system. And we definitely are thinking of socio-techno-economic whole energy systems when we're thinking about energy demand. And we've identified that using less energy across the economy can deliver improved quality of life with added key benefits listed here. So on affordability, we believe that action on efficiency enables households to use less energy while delivering the same energy service. This means lower energy bills and has wider economic and societal benefits across the whole community. By reducing energy bills and other energy service cost burdens, this can help, for example, the 6.3 million UK households in fuel poverty and also reduce transport poverty. On security, we are trying to better understand the linkage between national energy security and resilience. And we think that security and resilience can be improved by a combination of increased renewables and reduced energy demand. Through that, we can reduce our reliance on imported energy. So, for example, since May 2021 through to April 2022, we spent over £76 billion on fuel import. By reducing our reliance on imports, we can reduce associated price shocks because we will be less exposed to global fossil fuel markets. On health and social benefits, it's clear to us that warmer homes and more active lifestyles and reduced air pollution from lower fossil fuel use are all valuable co-benefits of reducing energy demand. And B mentioned co-benefits and how difficult some of these are to evaluate. But the estimated cost burden to the NHS of people living in cold, damp homes is over £1 billion a year. And the estimated costs to the NHS of physical inactivity is around £1 billion per year. So health and social benefits reduce cost burdens to the NHS and to society. In terms of our energy systems, we see the need for major investment in our energy systems. But this major investment, which is required in all low carbon futures, is reduced if we have less energy demand, because we will need a smaller overall energy system. And so that will be cheaper, quicker, and easier to deliver. Investment needed to expand the energy system is reduced by up to 40% by 2050 if we transform our use of energy. And a fully flexible energy system, we think, can deliver net savings of between 9.6 billion and 16.7 billion each year by 2050 if we get the energy system design correct. In terms of value for people, society, and the economy, here we want to look at energy demand reduction as part of a more sustainable and greener economy. And we think that enables us to support greater job creation and income generation, and that can lead to more equitable prosperity across the economy. And finally, innovation is our sixth area where we think low energy demand has benefit across society. And by integrating new technologies as well as innovation in lifestyle changes, we think that lower energy demand can improve society and help establish the UK as a global leader in action to reduce energy demand. One final point before I hand over to our first theme lead is that B did mention workforce ethnicity, and as the Energy Demand Research Centre, we do have a requirement and a belief that equality, diversity and inclusion is important, and that lower energy demand can benefit all sectors of society. So we're very keen on the equity element of energy demand reduction. So that's a whistle-stop tour of our call to action on energy demand. I'll now hand over to our first theme lead to present. If you can move the slide on, Mari, I'll hand over to John.
Great, thank you, Sarah. I'm going to give you a whistle-stop tour of one of the themes. We've got a few minutes each, so obviously do get in contact with me if anything is of real interest to you, and we'll be very happy to provide further information. So, as it says, I'm John Barrett from the University of Leeds, and I'm heading the theme on futures. And this theme includes researchers from Leeds, Lancaster, and also from UCL, with expertise in energy systems modelling, policy assessment, and also public deliberation approaches, really embedding a truly interdisciplinary approach, which you will see as a common theme through all of the presentations, I'm sure. Next slide, please. The research which we are conducting in this centre builds very strongly on the work that was done under the Centre for Research into Energy Demand Solutions, CREDS, where I brought together a team of 17 researchers to model how much we feel we can reduce the energy demand in the UK without compromising our quality of life, to make a significant contribution towards our climate ambitions and efforts. And there's a few things just to draw from that. We showed that we could halve energy demand by 2050 without compromising quality of life. But we also showed that if we don't get a reduction above 40%, we are highly unlikely or make it extremely challenging to deliver our climate ambitions. Therefore, energy demand reduction is really one of the key mechanisms which we need to deliver our goals. But at the same time, it's probably the only area which can deliver such a large list of co-benefits, which we would miss out on if we didn't actually pursue this direction. Next slide, please. One thing that we recognise here is that while we created this strong vision and we understood using bottom-up models and also a whole systems model what would be needed in individual sectors, be it agriculture, industry, offices, homes, mobility, and so on, we also recognise that further research is required on how we actually operationalise this vision now. How are we going to move from having this strong vision and focus on what we can achieve to actually understanding some of the trickier dimensions that we need to help deliver this? And while obviously this theme won't provide all those answers, it will provide a number of key insights in how we can actually make this vision a reality. Next slide, please. I'm just going to briefly introduce you to 4 of the projects within the theme to show you how we're going to try and achieve this goal. The perceptions and willingness of citizens to make this transition is extremely important for us to understand. And we really need to understand the conditions which citizens will place on the various different technologies and social changes that we require. To do this, we've put a team together with Becky Willis from Lancaster University and also Steve Pye and some of his colleagues from UCL to bring together the technical modelling, which we've done so far, but bringing this together with a citizens panel that we're operating for 2 years within the centre to really assess these conditions and to understand what is necessary and how this can happen over the short time frame that we have. In essence, we are hoping to expand what we've described as the political space of possibility and also make an important advancement in key methodological developments, where at the moment we have large departments, be it in the Committee on Climate Change or be it in government itself, which carries out this modelling. And at the same time, we have separate, really valuable information on perceptions and using deliberative approaches And we are looking at expanding those methodologies to bring it together while working closely with these key decision-making bodies. Another project, which you'll hear more about under the Place theme, but just a quick mention here, is that we recognise that the transition will be different in different locations, and that our 50% reduction in emissions will vary. The technological responses, the social transformations needed could change. And therefore, we are adding our information into one of the key projects in the Place theme to be able to actually forecast or create scenarios about how it will vary and how different locations will achieve their pathway towards a low energy future. Our next project will be utilising a tool which is operated at UCL to take our vision of a 50% reduction and work out, in essence, how this will operate at a very fine temporal level. How will this work out from hour to hour? Because the ultimate aim here is this energy demand reduction must be reducing the overall size of the electricity system. Finally, we're looking at issues of fair energy futures to understand how this transition works. And here we're looking at employing a model which we developed at the University of Leeds to understand the distributional effect of low energy futures across different income groups, to understand who is changing and who is changing by how much. So that's our brief introduction to the theme, and I will now hand it over to our next theme lead. So thank you. Over to you, Jacopo.
Yeah, and that's me. I'm Jacopo Torriti. I'm a professor of energy economics and policy at the University of Reading, and I'm going to lead the flexibility theme. Mary, next slide. So this is the team. We have a mix of technical, economic, and social sciences expertise in mobility, heating, buildings. You can see from different universities, Reading, like myself and colleagues, Cardiff, Imperial, Newcastle, and UCL. What brings us together is the research effort to understand how price, technology, social changes lead to changes in demand-side flexibility. And by that, I don't just mean volumes of flexibility, but also how energy services and everyday life is affected and interacts with demand-side flexibility. Next slide, Mary, please. So demand-side flexibility, and by that I mean the capacity to use energy in different locations at different times of the day and of the year, is increasingly seen as a solution to many problems. So this is a big challenge in the research space. The demand-side flexibility is seen as making the most of renewables, making the most of distributed generation and network capacity, decreasing energy bills and system operation costs, and also mitigating peaks associated with the electrification of heating and transport. The stakes are high, and as Sarah already introduced, depending on how you account for the benefits of demand-side flexibility, you may have net savings in the region of between 5 billion to 16 billion pounds per year by the year 2050. And the bottom slide, you can see the various reports try to estimate which volumes of flexible capacity are required in a net zero system, and the bubbles get bigger and bigger in terms of volume or gigawatts of flexible capacity. So this is just to say we start from that level of quantification of a potential, as well as the work that I led with other colleagues as part of CRED on demand-side flexibility. Next slide. And the aim of our work is to assess the potential, the impacts, and the implications of demand-side flexibility, and to explore solutions that enable effective and equitable deployment of demand-side flexibility. So we thought of these four objectives: increasing demand-side flexibility and how this will be delivered in practice, informing decisions on reducing balancing costs to minimize the impacts on energy bills, generating innovative ideas on where flexibility will originate from. So, for instance, until 10 to 15 years ago, many would think of electric vehicle charging and heat pumps primarily as a problem in terms of increases in peak electricity consumption. However, we now know that they're also part of the solution. In a similar way, there might be demand-side flexibility solutions, both in the technology realm, but also in terms of social change, which we're not considering at the moment and might be part of a solution for net zero. And then the fourth objective, ensuring that the push for flexibility maximizes benefits and minimizes adverse impacts. So we want to be informing policy making and be a research engine for increasing demand-side flexibility and be the evidence place for that. Next slide, please. So a bit on our projects. We organized 3 areas of projects according to our aim. So in terms of trying to understand the potential and values of flexibility, we have this umbrella of projects that look at flexibility at different scales, trying to quantify and characterize demand-side flexibility, improving resilience through demand-side flexibility. And then we have a package of work looking at the implications and access to benefits of flexibility. So this is about widening participation in flexibility. And then there's a project on flexibility, energy service quality, and everyday life. The third area of projects, call it making flexibility happen effectively and equitably. So we have projects around releasing demand-side flexibility full potential, the many roads to flexibility. We have a project on positive energy buildings and the costs and benefits of demand-side flexibility options. So the bottom part of this slide shows some examples of outputs that we intend to produce. One of them is already out. We published about a week ago a report on the demand flexibility certificate. So you have the QR there and the link if you're interested in this report that sets out in a sense a methodology for demand flexibility certificates. We're working collaboratively on flexibility services fact sheets, so which demand users can participate in existing flexibility services. So for whom does it work, and so on. We intend to carry out an analysis of the National Grid ESO demand flexibility service after the first 2 winters, and having previously worked on the quantification of the potential for the demand flexibility service run by National Grid ESO. We have a Cambridge case study on positive energy buildings. We will come out with a flexibility impact assessment. This is not just a comparison of costs and benefits of demand-side flexibility technologies. It's about also the wider values that demand flexibility mobilizes. And then we'll have a flexibility forum, primarily with Ofgem as an interlocutor, but open to others, where we get together and discuss findings from our theme. And I'm going to pass on to the next theme lead, who's Greg.
Thanks, Jacopo. Hi, everyone. I'm Greg Marsden from the University of Leeds. I'm based at the Institute for Transport Studies, and I head the place-based theme within EDRC. Next slide, please, Mari. So the place theme is, again, a collection of different people from different disciplinary backgrounds. So myself and Malcolm Morgan work in transport studies. Peter Taylor and his team work on industrial energy demand. Faye Wade is leading our work on skills, and Donald Brown and Stefan Buzarowski are our experts on retrofit and delivery models, again, also working with Faye on that. So I'll just introduce a little bit about the problem as we see it and the opportunities that we're going to try and address. Next slide, Mari. So our overarching question is, how should we incorporate place in the design and delivery of a faster and fairer net zero transition? Clearly, there are some things which benefit from coordination at scale, and yet there are other things which work better when you take into account local circumstances. And that's the situation we have on the ground today. We've got massive diversity in terms of the way the energy system works and the way in which people access the various different services. So we've got an uneven state of play today. The question is, what happens? What's the best way of dealing with that as we move in through to the net zero transition? We think overall, although there is a range of different approaches locally, both within the UK, if you look in Wales, Scotland, England have very different approaches. So you just mute if you're on. If you're on the call. I've got someone called Deborah who's sort of showing as mics on. Top-down policy making is still really strong. So we have a lot of national level planning, even though we've got this diversity, and national planning tends to work in fairly strong sectoral policy silos. We've known that for a long time, and that runs the risk of missing integration opportunities, which are much more sort of keenly felt and easily identifiable on the ground, but not necessarily more actionable. Place is often seen as a variable, discussed as a variable that impacts uptake rates of technologies, but we're not seeing place as an opportunity to think about how we might design different approaches that are more place and contextual sensitive, and therefore we might go faster and get better outcomes. So we generally think there's plenty of integration opportunities which are being missed, but critically, working from a top-down level runs the risk of reinforcing existing inequalities or potentially opening up new ones. So in our research, we start from the presumption that places need to be considered as active participants in the transition, and we've got to pay attention to the technologies that we're thinking about, the skills base, the cultures in different places, the nature of the economy, the type of work that's done, the physical environment, the services, and also the politics that are there. Next slide, Mari. So just a few pointers maybe of the kind of evidence that we're using as we're beginning to think about this problem. That you've heard a little bit about the place-based carbon calculator. John mentioned that as part of the work in the Futures theme. This was developed by Malcolm Morgan and Gillian Annable as part of the CREDS Research Centre. It's an amazingly useful mapping tool which looks at various different energy services across the UK down to a local super output area scale, and allows us to understand the diversity of consumption based emissions in different places. So you can see that map there just shows just how different places might be as we start. Then there's lots of data about differential uptake of different technologies, particularly as we're understanding grants, installations, and so on. And we can see that that's not happening evenly across the country. So once we layer these two things together, what does that mean about places going faster or slower? What does that mean about our investment plans? What should we be planning for? Everywhere to go the same speed, or some places to go faster and slower? There was some really interesting work done by the Place-Based Climate Action Network with PwC and Otley Energy, which looked at the theoretical difference between taking a kind of top-down place agnostics approach or a more place-specific approach to designing policy. They found that you could deliver the same outcomes for almost a quarter of the capital cost, and you could achieve nearly twice the co-benefits by taking a more place-specific approach. Now, the question is, can we realise those kinds of gains in practice on the ground, and what are the tools that we need to put that together? So for my last slide, I think, next slide. We're approaching the place theme through 4 different projects. The first one is led by Stefan Buzarowski from Manchester on place-based retrofit and regeneration models. So there are lots of different approaches that have been tried and are being tried in different places as to how we deliver the kind of change that B was talking about earlier about, well, okay, which retrofit options, when to change from a boiler to a heat pump, for example. The question is, at what kind of scale should we be thinking about that? Is that individuals? Should it be street level? Is it bigger areas? What's the route to getting that information to people? Is it formal kind of energy services, and should those be local or should they be national? And what's the role of people and networks in communicating those opportunities from peer to peer rather than always doing things formally? So what are the options that we have available there? Second project is connected to the skills point, which B brought up. So we'll be looking at building up bottom-up models of skills needs across different sectors. So we know we've got an awful lot of transition into electrification of various different technologies. We tend to look at those skills needs sector by sector. So where are those skills pressures going to come together in places, and how should we manage that? How does that map to, for example, the industrial transition that's going on in a particular area? Can we identify skills gap, and if so, what's the response of the education system in helping with that? And part of that again is thinking about this role of informal labour, private individuals, networks, and professionals in communicating about how this transition can be unlocked at speed. The third example is transformations in place, and that's where we're going to be working with the futures theme. So what do these national or even local scenarios look like when you break them down into the actual places on the ground where this is going to happen? So for example, in transport, the area that I spend most of my time in, how are we going to deal with the vast amounts of terraced housing stock there, where we've got massively overparked areas at the moment? What's that going to look like? How can we deliver that? And how do those kinds of questions interact with areas which might be difficult to decarbonise in terms of retrofit, for example, or heat pumps? So some places might be able to go really fast and others might be going really slow. So how are we going to deal with those kind of nexus problems and enable and unlock that opportunity? And finally, underpinning all of our work is a significant upgrade of the place-based carbon calculator, which I briefly introduced. So we'll be drawing in as many open source data sources as possible to provide our local partners with free tools, which hopefully give them insight into how to improve their decision-making processes. So I'll hand over there to Kate, who's, I think, our next speaker for the governance theme.
Yes, thank you very much, Greg. So I'm Kate Pangbourne. I'm from the University of Leeds, also, as it happens, from the Institute for Transport Studies, and I'm leading the governance theme for EDRC. It's really important that this theme is kind of explained, because it feels a little bit different to some of the others. So next slide, please, Murray. This is who we are. We're a team that is spread across the University of Leeds, the University of Lancaster, and the University of Sussex. And as we've heard from the other themes, we are also quite interdisciplinary with geography, political studies, sociology, and a range of different methodological skills as well. So this is our starting grid, as it were. Next slide, please. So in the governance theme, our sort of approach is one of trying to understand how we can co-create and implement new governance systems to enable us to get away from the sort of top-down policy making that Greg mentioned, and to enable a more sort of bottom-up uptake of energy demand solutions across policy, citizen and industrial spheres, and also getting away from some of the divisions between different sectors that we tend to see. And that our aim in this is to contribute to an absolute reduction in UK energy demand across different sectors and fields. And co-benefits, which have been mentioned a few times already today as well, are a key element of the work that we're doing, trying to understand and present those from in a manner that will support more progressive framings that help to improve governance and politically feasible solutions, because these structures and processes that we have in governance and the political feasibility, which has been somewhat challenged lately, are critical elements of the energy transition, cutting across all sectors and intersectoral challenges. And so our challenge is to make energy demand reduction governable and take into account the complexity of the governance system that we have in the UK, with national, subnational, regional and local scales and geographies, some asymmetric devolution of powers, and with different sectors having different geographies of governance as well. And we want to embed a sensitivity to energy demand reduction across the landscape of policy areas in the UK, not just have it under the heading of energy. So next slide, please, Myra. So you'll sense that there's a bit of a theme in the way that our themes have organised our projects. We also have 4 areas of research, each of us a leading different one. And those are deliberative practice for action on insight, communities and governance, where we'll be working particularly closely with the place theme, but not exclusively with the place theme, political feasibility and readiness to act, and then looking at the frameworks and the paradigms and practices that are constituting the way that governance is operating at the moment. So we kind of recognise that these boundaries between our project areas are quite literally academic, but this project structure has been informed by the need to operationalise the wealth of evidence on energy demand from previous research investments, including CREDS, but also UKIRC, and to operationalise that evidence with cutting-edge governance theories and co-creation research principles to generate insight into how we can scale sort of up, down and outwards more deliberative and participatory decision processes and practices to speed up energy demand reduction in support and pursuit of the net zero goal. Next slide, please, Mary. So just to give you a brief snapshot of some of the methods and sub-projects that we will be utilising for those 4 project areas and in our cross-sector working. The sort of typical approaches that we're going to be using are deliberative, collaborative, for example, using our policy challenge co-production panel to generate governance innovations to support the policy practitioners to take effective policy action on energy demand, and holding public debates to involve citizens in a different way to that under the Futures theme. A wealth of evidence reviews, in part to meet the needs of the co-production panel, but also to meet other needs around evidence needed around governance for the centre as a whole, a range of evaluations and assessments, for example, developing an assessment framework to incorporate the co-benefits of energy demand reduction into policy making so that there is a more even representation of the well-being, health and equity and environmental benefits of some of the energy demand reduction policies. case studies, looking at different communities, different places, different sectors. For example, under a sectoral heading, myself with the transport hat on will have a look at refrigerated food transport and how we might decarbonise that in order to reduce the energy that is required for the refrigeration element. We'll be using co-creation methods in the deliberative mechanisms, but also with our community case studies. They will be cross-sectoral as much as possible and theory-informed in relation to government and politics. And we'll be working closely with other themes around the communities of interest and or place in that respect. So I think that is now my point at which I hand over to Karen.
Can I just check if Karen can hear us okay?
You're muted, Karen.
That Kate that froze there, I was thinking I dropped out.
We can hear you now fine.
Okay, right. So, well, last but very much not least, we have the equity theme. As it says in the slide, I'm Professor Karen Turner. I'm the Director of the Centre for Energy Policy at the University of Strathclyde. I'm afraid that we're missing our slide on the team, so I'll just introduce them verbally. We've got the co-investigators are Gesh Hubner, who's based down at Imperial College, and Laurent Liu, who's at Surrey, and also we have Christian Calvillo, who's based alongside me at the Centre for Energy Policy. He's our research co-investigator. And also on the call, we have Hannah Corbett, who's a knowledge exchange fellow, which is really valuable for us, obviously, because of the amount of engagement that we'll want to do in a theme like equity. But also she'll be supporting me on I've got the role of the impact champion for the centre. So apologies, we don't have photographs, but I'm sure they'll show up on your screens throughout the Q&A. So next slide, please. So I think the issue is basically one of, we're talking about a major shift in our economy and our society and going to net zero. So it needs to be not only technically feasible, but also socially and politically feasible and sustainable. So this implies that energy demand solutions are going to have to deliver an affordable net zero energy system and society, but also a more equitable one. And I think that the equity challenges here, that there's a wide range of them, and that we'll be attempting to look at in the equity theme, both through what's coming out of the other themes, but also with the research that's been identified so far for our theme. But, there are things like the equity of access and the justice of access to different solutions. They're not going to be there for everybody, and then that's going to have knock-on effects. But to the kind of, I guess, the central concern around equity is about affordability and what's going to happen to people's incomes. And I think a key question that we've identified here that I think is in everybody's mind throughout this energy price crisis is whether or not energy demand actions can substantially reduce fuel and other energy-related causes of poverty, including things like transport poverty. And I picked up this statistic here on the right-hand side from National Energy Action. Back before the energy price crisis began in October 2021, we had 4.5 million households living in energy poverty. And if that's a bad enough figure, but since then, throughout the energy price crisis, the updated figure for July 2023 is 6.6 million households. So it means another 50% increase in the already challenging figure that we had. So it's substantial. It's a large share of the population and a large share of households. So in the equity theme, we're looking at can we have equity in terms of accessing all the different energy demand solutions, but can we do something through the energy demand solutions that we're rolling out that are going to improve the equity situation with regard to energy? And so we're looking at things like what kind of evidence, what kind of tools and what kind of models do we need to develop in this energy demand centre in order to improve knowledge and understanding and to enable the delivery of actions. So next slide, please, Mary. So like several of the other themes, we're building on a sound base that's been set in the work of the CRED Centre. And on the right-hand side, I've got an example of a piece that was done by the Green Alliance, where they were looking at whether or not a net zero economy can reduce fuel and transport poverty. So one of the questions that we've got, and in this work, they were looking at some of the types of benefits that my colleagues have been talking about might be generated through delivering energy demand actions and could thereby help resolve these poverty problems. In my own previous research, I wasn't part of CREDS. I've come in as a new member into the EDRC, but we've been doing quite a lot of work around residential energy efficiency, and I'm an economist. Economists like efficiency because efficiency generates additional income, gives people more spending power on other things. But this piece of work that we did around funding UK residential energy efficiency, where we were looking at eco compared to alternatives, including things like giving people grants to make it more affordable, we found that you can generate positive employment impacts, which of course leads to the generation of not only income but tax revenue to enable government to have funds available to spend in those households that don't get as much employment income to make things affordable. And this helped in the first year of the pandemic to convince government to put some public money behind energy efficiency actions. The actual policy action that we were looking at there didn't play out over the long term, but hopefully the idea started to embed that there are benefits that will emerge that will make supporting a number of households and improving their energy efficiency and otherwise decarbonising their heat. Sufficient benefits can be done to enable this to be funded. So if you go on to the next slide, please. So we know from the previous research that it is possible to generate benefits that are going to improve the situation of individuals in the economy and the exchequer as a whole. But now we need to really establish the how. How are we going to bring about those types of outcomes? So, we've got projects, particularly led by Gay Schubner down at Imperial, where we're really trying to understand the equity challenge and landscape. And from initial review work, this will build into a living lab for equity. And I've got that down at the bottom, so I'll come back to that. But basically what we're going to do here is analyse just how different demand solutions will impact the equity of outcomes for people who are living in different areas, so linking to the place theme under different circumstances, and what policy levers are required, linking to Kate's theme on governance. And here we'll be looking to build up evidence and understanding as to equity issues, such as these priority areas of reducing fuel and transport poverty. How could these be prioritised while also delivering on all the other necessary outcomes around energy security, reducing emissions, and supporting green growth? So is there a way to prioritise a focus on equity and the type of outcomes that are required there? And so we've identified a range of projects. We have various pieces of work that are going to be doing some variant of whole systems analysis around policy action on things like energy efficiency and bills, fuel transport poverty, and also the labour justice outcomes of potential energy demand solutions. And this is really important. My own work is an economy-wide analysis because, as I said, what happens to the economy and employment and incomes, what happens to the exchequer is really important. But also it can bring distributional problems in that in previous research that we found that the benefits of energy efficiency to the lowest 20% of households largely come from the policy itself. But for the other 80% of households, they'll be from economy-wide benefits. And the problem is that a lot of the households who are living in poverty don't have access to income that's generated in the economy. Government can try to index benefit payments and things like that, linking to inflation. But generally, the problem is that a lot of households in fuel poverty can't go out and benefit from things like green jobs or income that's being generated in the economy. So we need to make sure that the distributional implications are not being worsened, even if the picture is looking good on things like green growth. So there's a lot of work to do there. Another one that I just mentioned is the idea of creating an equity living lab. And this is really important because a lot of the work with whole systems, it can be both bottom up and top down, but there really is a need to talk to people. And that's not just about understanding solutions, it's actually about understanding what the equity problems are. Are we understanding equity problems as people are experiencing them? And that's why it's really important for us to have that direct interaction with people. And then with Laurent's work, that we're also looking to develop a human-centered and self-adaptive artificial intelligence tool that could hopefully be used across the net zero community, again, to try and improve equity outcomes along with all the other ones. So we've got our page on the website, but I think I shall stop there, Mari, so that we can move on to the important part of the day and getting into the Q&A.
Thank you, Karen. And I will actually stop the sharing just 1 second. Because before we move on to the Q&A, I just want to say thank you so much to all the speakers, particularly to B, who I think has left now to go to another meeting. But thank you so much for all the speakers, all the team, and obviously, thank you to UKRI for who is our funder, both EPSRC and ESRC. And I'll hand over to Sarah now, who is going to lead on the Q&A.
Thank you very much. So we have had some questions in the chat, which I'll pose first, but I invite people to use the raise hand function or type further questions in the chat. And I'll start off with a question to you, Mari, that Jonathan Ward raised, and he's had to leave, so we'll follow up outside of the meeting. But he was particularly asking how can people work with the energy